Dawn, September 1944. A tiny American tank destroyer, written off as useless, faces an entire German armored brigade in the fog. What happened next defied every prediction of the war. This is not just a story of machines, but of men who redefined impossible odds. It's a tale of physics-defying shots, tactical genius, and a morning that changed the course of armored warfare forever. At exactly 7:42 a.m., on the 19th of September, a young lieutenant stood in the open hatch of his vehicle atop a French hill known as Hill 146. The mist was a physical blanket, a white wall so dense the world ended at 30 feet. Breath hung in the air. The only sound was the idle chug of his own engine. Then, a shape of darker grey coalesced from the white void. The long, lethal barrel of a German Panther tank emerged first, sweeping slowly, blindly, like the feeler of some primordial insect. Lieutenant Edwin Leaper was 26 years old, with 3 months of command experience and 0 engagements against the Wehrmacht's most feared weapon. He commanded a platoon of just for M18 Hellcats. Earlier that morning, frantic radio reports had crackled through to the command post. Elements of the German 113th Panzer Brigade, comprising 45 brand new Panther tanks and 36 Panzer IVs, were rolling toward the 4th Armored Division's vulnerable headquarters. His tiny force, positioned on this nondescript rise near Arracourt, was the only thing between that steel avalanche and disaster. The M18 Hellcat was a machine the Army High Command had profound doubts about. At 17 tons, it was half the weight of the standard Sherman medium tank. Its frontal armor was a laughable 13 mm thicker heavy machine gun round could punch through it. To the men in the safer, heavier Shermans, it was a rolling coffin, a suicide sled. Its design philosophy hinged on one principle: speed. It could hit nearly 60 miles per hour on a road, making it the fastest-tracked armored vehicle of the war. But on this fog-shrouded, muddy hill, raw speed seemed a theoretical advantage, a party trick with no practical use against what was coming. What was coming was the Panther, a mechanical titan weighing 45 tons. Its frontal glacis plate was 80 mm of hardened, sloped steel, rendering it virtually impervious to most Allied tank guns at standard combat ranges. Its own long-barreled 75 mm cannon was a precision instrument of death, accurate and powerful at distances over a mile. The Hellcat's 76 mm gun, by brutal contrast, could not penetrate the front of a Panther at any range with its standard ammunition. Not at 1,000 yards, not at 500, not even at point blank. Official Army gunnery tables proved it. To achieve a kill, a Hellcat crew needed a miracle, a perfect hit on the lower gun mountlet, hoping for a ricochet down through the thin top armor, or a daring flanking maneuver to hit the weaker side plates. General Andrew Bruce's controversial tank destroyer doctrine demanded these light, fast vehicles avoid stand-up fights. Their mission was to ambush, strike from concealment, and vanish before the enemy could react. In the lecture halls of Fort Hood, it was brilliant. Here, in the face of dozens of veteran German Panzers, it sounded like an elegant theory for getting good men killed. The German offensive, codenamed and ordered personally by Hitler, had one objective: halt Patton's relentless Third Army in its tracks, recapture the key city of Nancy, and throw the Americans back across the Moselle River. The spearhead of this desperate push was the Panther, manned by new crews fresh from training, but riding in one of the most formidable vehicles on the planet. They were confident, perhaps overconfident, rolling forward through the impenetrable mist. Back on the hill, the first Panther solidified from a shadow into a terrifying reality. Now barely 100 yards away at the base of the slope, inside the lead Hellcat, Sergeant Stacy, the vehicle commander, had perhaps 15 seconds to make a decision that would validate or demolish their entire doctrine. The German gun continued its slow, blind traverse. Stacy's gunner, eyes pressed to the telescopic sight, whispered on target. The electric motor of the Hellcat's turret whined with a smooth, urgent hummerful 360-degree rotation in under 20 seconds. The Panther's turret, by stark contrast, was traversed by 2 sweating crewmen cranking a hand wheel. A full rotation took nearly a minute. In the split-second calculus of armored combat, This was the only tangible advantage they possessed. Stacy's voice cut through the tension. Fire. The 76mm gun erupted with a deafening crack and a violent jolt. The shell crossed the 75-yard gap in a blink. It struck the Panther's right side drive sprocket and track. With a metallic scream, the track shattered into useless segments. The 45-ton behemoth lurched violently to one side and ground to a halt, smoke already pouring from its damaged suspension. The German crew, well drilled, began bailing out immediately. They knew what came next. Stacy's loader, a man named Corrigan, slammed another round into the breech in under 7 seconds. Up, the gunner fired again. This round tore through the Panther's thinner side armor with ease. A jet of orange flame shot from the hatches, followed by a deep, fuel-fed roar as the tank's internal ammunition began to cook off. The German commander and gunner scrambled away. The driver and radio operator did not emerge. In less than 60 seconds, the rolling coffin had its first confirmed kill. But there was no time for celebration. A second Panther emerged from the fog 30 seconds later, almost in the same spot. Its crew had heard the explosion, knew they were under attack, but could see nothing. The fog was their enemy, too. Stacy's gunner, now operating with lethal rhythm, fired without waiting for orders. The shell struck the second Panther's thick gun mantlet. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the round would simply bounce off, but it ricocheted just as the ballistics experts have theorized but rarely seen in combat. The deflected shell angled downward, piercing the thin armor plate above the driver's compartment. The Panther simply stopped. No fire, no secondary explosion. It just went dead, a metal tomb for its crew. On the left flank of the hill, Sergeant Henry Hartman, a veteran who had been with the battalion since its activation, watched muzzle flashes through the soup. His own gunner acquired a third Panther materializing at 90 yards. A single, well-aimed shot, a flash of impact on the side hull, and then the familiar fireball. Lieutenant Leaper, from the center position, engaged a fourth. His first shot sailed high, slamming into the trees behind. His gunner took a breath, adjusted, and fired again. The round pierced the turret ring, jamming it. The German crew spilled out, running frantically into the concealing fog. A fifth Panther fell to Stacy's crew. 5 of the Reich's finest tanks destroyed in under 4 minutes. The doctrine, against all odds, was working. The fog had created a perverse equalizer, negating the Panther's superior range and firepower, compressing the battle into a knife-fight range where the Hellcat's rapid turret traverse and rate of fire were decisive. Then, at 7:50 a.m., the pendulum swung. A 6th Panther, commanded by a more cautious veteran, had hulled down behind a slight rise. Only its turret was visible. It had seen the muzzle flashes of Stacy's gun. While the Hellcat's crew worked to reload, the German gunner, hand-cranking furiously, finally brought his own monstrous gun to bear. He fired first. The Panther's 75mm shell ripped into the right side of Stacy's turret. The explosion was catastrophic inside the open-topped compartment. The loader was killed instantly. Shrapnel tore into the gunner and Sergeant Stacy himself. The driver and assistant driver, shielded in the hull, were unhurt but now trapped in a wounded machine, its right track destroyed. Through a haze of pain and smoke, Stacy gave the order to withdraw. The driver coaxed the crippled Hellcat backward down the reverse slope, trailing smoke and sparks as German shells kicked up geysers of dirt around them. Lieutenant Leaper, watching from his position, felt a cold knot form in his stomach. They were down to 3 operational vehicles. The radio chatter indicated the German column was still advancing. The math was now cruel and simple. 3 lightweight tank destroyers against the remaining, vast majority of a reinforced Panzer brigade. Could a handful of men and these undergun machines possibly hold this hill? The answer had to be yes. There was no fallback position. Hartmann's crew answered with the 7th Panther, a clean engine deck shot that turned the German tank into a towering pyre. Leaper's gunner crippled an 8th. The Germans, now fully alert to the ambush, tried to coordinate a response, but the fog rendered their radio calls and commands useless. They were blind mice in a maze where unseen predators struck from nowhere. The 9th Panther attempted a flanking move, exposing its side. Hartmann's gunner put a single armor-piercing round into its ammunition storage. The subsequent explosion was so violent it lifted the Panther's multi-ton turret clean off its hull, a horrific sight even through the mist. The 10th German tank commander, wiser than his peers, ordered a retreat, as his Panther reversed. Sergeant Miller's Hellcat on the far right flank fired. The first shot missed. The second was a masterpiece. It struck the sloping gun mantlet and, in a near-perfect demonstration of ballistic geometry, ricocheted downwards. Slicing through the thin upper hull plate, the Panther shuddered and died. They weren't trading steel. They were trading wit for weight. By 8:02 a.m., frustrated and bloodied, the German brigade attempted a more organized push. 6 Panthers advanced in a loose line toward the hill's base. Leaper's 3 remaining Hellcats fired almost in unison. 3 shots rang out. 3 Panthers staggered and stopped. 1 began burning immediately. The remaining 3 German tanks scrambled backward, 1 throwing a track in its haste. The slaughter was awe-inspiring, but the strain on the American crews was immense. They were exhausted, their ears ringing, the smell of cordite and fear thick in their open turrets. That strain turned to tragedy at 8:07. A single Panther, led by a commander with an instinct for terrain, had somehow climbed a supposedly impassable ridge line to the northeast. It emerged on the flank of Sergeant Miller's position at a mere 40 yards. The German gunner had a perfect, stationary target. He took it. The armor-piercing round pierced the Hellcat's paper-thin frontal armor as if it weren't there. Miller and his gunner were killed before they even knew the threat existed. To more men lost, to more friends gone. The cost of this defiant stand was being paid in blood, by the hour, by the minute. And now the environment itself began to turn against them. As the clock ticked past 8:15, the fog began to thin. Wisps tore apart, revealing longer stretches of the muddy field below. Visibility stretched to 100, then 200 yards. The Hellcat's crucial cloak was dissolving. The Panther's greatest advantages, its superior optics and high-velocity gun, were coming back online. At 8:23, a Panther gunner, seeing the vague shape of Leaper's vehicle, took a speculative shot from 300 yards. The shell missed the hull but struck the ground 10 feet in front, erupting in a shower of dirt, rock, and shrapnel that clanged against the M18's thin skin. No penetration, but the message was thunderously clear. "We can see you now. Stay still and you die." Leaper didn't need to be told twice. "Driver, back us up. Move left 50 yards. Find a new firing position." The Hellcat's true talent finally came into play. The driver threw the transmission into reverse, sped down the back slope, raced laterally, and crested the hill again at a new point all in under 40 seconds. Shoot and scoot. The doctrine wasn't just theory, it was their lifeline. The final, dramatic act of the morning's engagement began at 8:28. The 15th Panther appeared, moving with a new, cautious professionalism. Its commander had huddled down behind a ruined stone wall, only his turret visible. He was scanning with binoculars, searching for the elusive killers who had decimated his column. Hartmann's gunner, a man whose skill was about to become legend, acquired the target. His first shot was a ranging round, hitting the stone wall and showering the Panther with debris. It revealed their position, but it also made the German turret stop its search and begin its painfully slow traverse toward them. The race was on. Hartmann's loader slammed a final armor-piercing round home. The gunner adjusted his aim minutely, compensating for the range, for the angle, for the ricochet he intended to cause. He breathed out. The Panther's long gun was still swinging, so slowly toward them. He fired. The shell crossed the 200-yard gap and struck the very center of the Panther's gun mantlet. For the second time that morning, physics performed a miracle. The round deflected downward, vanished into the German tank's hull, and silence followed. The Panther's turret stopped traversing. No hatches flew open. No crew escaped. It was just over. By 8:35, the firing had stopped. The German attack had lost its momentum, the brigade commander unwilling to feed more tanks into the meat grinder of the foggy hill. Reinforcements from the rest of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion were finally arriving. Lieutenant Leaper and Sergeant Hartmann, with their 2 remaining Hellcats, held the field. The fog lifted completely by 9 a.m., revealing the brutal accounting of the morning. 15 Panther tanks lay scattered and smouldering around the approaches to Hilt 146. Some were burnt-out husks, others sat intact but dead. Captain Thomas Evans, the company commander, arrived and counted the wrecks twice, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. The kill ratio was preposterous. Hartmann's crew was credited with 6 of the kills, his gunners' nearly supernatural accuracy earning a later Bronze Star. The suicide sleds had just delivered one of the most lopsided tactical victories of the Western Front. But September 19th was merely the opening act. The Battle of Arracourt would rage for 10 more brutal days. The 704th, the guinea pig battalion for the Hellcat, would prove their morning's work was no fluke. They adapted, refined their shoot and scoot tactics, and used villages and orchards for ambush. Over the next week, Company C alone would be credited with destroying 39 German tanks. The vehicle once universally mocked was now urgently requested by front-line commands. Word spread through Patton's Third Army, the Hellcat works. Speed, properly wielded, could indeed slay the heavy armor monster. The legacy of the M18 Hellcat was cemented not in its flimsy steel plate, but in the minds of the men who mastered its unique, deadly ballet. It proved that technological superiority could be overthrown by superior tactics, by terrain, by weather, and by the sheer, unyielding nerve of a well-trained crew. The Panther was arguably a better tank. But on that hill in that fog, it was not the better weapon system. Lieutenant Edwin Leaper survived the war, fighting through the Ardennes and across the Rhine. He returned home to a quiet life, his name absent from headlines, his incredible morning on a French hill known only to a few. Sergeant Hartmann returned to work as a machinist. Most of the men did. They carried the memories, the loss of friends like Miller and Stacy's loader, and the knowledge of what they had achieved against impossible odds. The Army, in its post-war analysis, decided the specialized tank destroyer was obsolete. Heavy tanks would henceforth do the job. But the veterans of the 704th and of Hilt 146 knew the truth they had lived sometimes. The right tool for the job isn't the heaviest one, but the smartest, fastest, and bravest. They weren't trading steel. They were trading wit for weight. Speed was their armor and cunning was their gun. And for one foggy morning in September, that was more than enough to make history. If you want Winds of Thought to keep bringing you these lost stories of ingenuity and courage, please show your support. Hit the like button right now, it truly helps us reach more people. And subscribe to Winds of Thought for more videos that dive deep into history's most decisive moments.